Initial Content presents Lennon's Last Weekend. In our fifth and final podcast, Andy Peebles relives more of the historic interview with John Lennon, discussing his breakup with Yoko, the making of the album Double Fantasy, John's secret desire to have been a comedian, and his own personal security living in the city of New York. Other contributors include graphic artist and musician Klaus Vormann, DJ Bob Harris, producer and broadcaster Malcolm Gary, guitarist Earl Slick, record producer Jack Douglas, DJ Paul Gambacini, record producer Sir George Martin, and Beatle biographer Hunter Davies.
Over dinner at Mr. Chow's in New York after the interview, John had said to me, when we come to Britain in February, which we're going to do, this is December the 6th, 1980, can I come and be a guest on your Radio 1 morning show? And I said, that's the most stupid question you've ever asked me. And he said, is that a yes then? I said, yeah, it's a yes. He said, can you get a decent piano into the studio? So I said, yeah. Not only will we get it into the studio, but we'll have it tuned, especially for you. And he laughed. And he put his arms around me and genuinely hugged me. And he said, I can't thank you enough. He said, this has been absolutely fantastic. Thank you.
In December 1980, BBC journalist Andy Peebles flew to New York to interview the world's greatest rock star, John Lennon.
But I was really too scared to walk away. I was considering the life without the Beatles. What would it be? Ku Klux Klan were burning Beatle records and I was held up as a Satanist or something. The point of the bed-in a nutshell, was a commercial for peace.
During the interview, Lennon revealed many things he'd never spoken about before.
We had a miscarriage or something, did we?
You had a miscarriage and I was there.
Here you got a guy who is so honest and open about everything.
I was just writing the experience I'd had of withdrawing from heroin.
His heartfelt honesty and candid revelations surprised everyone.
I call it my lost weekend. It lasted 18 months.
When he was without Yoko, it was like a little step backwards.
But what I did when she kicked me out was I hit the bottle like I was 18 and 19.
He spoke his mind about some of the most controversial moments in his life.
Because the most I could have done was gather a big gang of demonstrators together, which the police could have shot, so what are they complaining about?
You got a Beatle. You have an outspoken Beatle. Do you really think Richard Nixon gave a crap about him?
Lennon was asked how safe he felt in New York.
I can go right out this door now and go in a restaurant. You want to know how great that is?
48 hours later, he was gunned down in the street.
The realization that John Lennon, who I'd interviewed on Saturday night in New York, had died while I was flying over the Atlantic was a shattering experience.
We thought we were bringing back to Britain 8 reels of 12-inch tape. What we in fact brought back was one of the most important obituaries in the history of British popular music.
This was Lennon's last weekend.
Yoko, obviously the artistic side of her appealed to John, and her skills bonded. I have said publicly, and I mean it not in a malicious way, but as a statement of fact, that Yoko Ono is not somebody who your average popular music lover would probably want to spend a great deal of time listening to. The irony that she recorded Walking on Thin Ice only the night before we did the interview in 1980, and they'd remixed it for discotheques. And it was a huge hit in the clubs in New York. A huge hit.
And I ought to say that you two went through a bit of a breakup, didn't you?
Yeah, I call it my lost weekend. It lasted 18 months when the feminist side of me died slightly and she said, get the hell out.
John's friend Klaus Vormann.
It was like being back in the Hamburg days when John was frustrated. He was frustrated and he was In a way, he felt, I'm free now.
But what I did when she kicked me out was I hit the bottle like I was 18 and 19, but when you're 37 or whatever I was when that happened, you can't take as much booze, but I was acting like I was still at college, just whacking it out and going out all the time. And
DJ Bob Harris.
Did you enjoy Harry Nilsson's album? Did you enjoy doing it?
Well, enjoy isn't the word. You see, what had happened was he lost his voice. We had a lot of fun. There was Keith Moon, Harry, me, Ringo, all living together in the house, and we had some moments, folks, but it got a little near the knuckle.
When he was without Yoko, it was like a little step backwards somehow. He was no hold. He had no hold to it.
She had talents, which John obviously cherished and liked. But we also know that the relationship didn't flounder on the rocks, but they had tremendous problems. And I certainly wasn't going to risk my professional neck on that night in December 1980 by going into discussing things like that.
I couldn't deal with the separation any other way. I mean, I just fell apart. And the only thing I knew was go to the bar and drink.
Because we read a lot, and I know for sure that the reports are terribly exaggerated about the thing at the Troubadour.
Oh, yeah.
John.
Yeah.
What did actually happen?
I got drunk and shouted. It was the first night I drank Brandy Alexander's, which is brandy and milk, folks. And I was with Harry Nilsson, who didn't quite get as much coverage as me, the bum. And he really encouraged me. I usually have somebody there that says, "Okay, Lennon, shut up," and I take it. But I didn't have anybody around me to say shut up, and I just went on and on.
It was not the best period of his life, I would say, but it was like a lesson.
That's when I straightened out in the middle of that album. That's when I realized there's something wrong here. This is crazy, man. So then I suddenly was the straight one in the middle of all these mad people. I suddenly was not one of them, And I pulled myself back and finished off the album best I could,
It was a pretty hectic period, pretty wild, and it sounds funny in retrospect, but it was pretty miserable. And I'm thankful that I'm out of it, and I don't drink now because it scares me. Even a glass of wine knocks me out now, so I'm happy about that. Forget about the booze.
There were 2 anniversaries to celebrate the tragedy of John's death. The first, 1 year on, I was asked by the BBC whether I would go to New York to interview Yoko. And I said, yes, of course I will. And I went. And she gave me a lovely interview, which ran on television. Then the second year, I think for the second anniversary, Yoko then said, could we come to Los Angeles? She then changed her mind again and said, would we go to Japan? Because she was going to get the hotel where she and John had spent quite a bit of time, specially opened in the Japanese winter. And would we do the interview there? And we went to Tokyo, stayed in a lovely hotel. Yoko had one of the very best sushi restaurants in Tokyo, opened especially for us to have lunch. She was spending a lot of time with a guy called Sam Havertoy. I have pondered and wondered for a long time just what sort of relationship she and Sam Havertoy had. I have very mixed views about her. I got very close to Sean. When I went back after the first year, I remember sitting in the kitchen at the Dakota with my arm around Sean, who would have been, 4, 5, and we were watching his favorite television program, Inspector Gadget. And I think he had decided that this guy, Andy, was all right and that he was a good friend. Then we went to Japan. There were the 3 of them. Yoko, Sam Havatoy, and Sean. And I kind of got the impression that Sam Havatoy wasn't 100% comfortable with me being there, because Sean, with whom he was obviously spending an enormous amount of time, seemed to rather like this disc jockey from England who chatted to him. I actually love the little man. I just thought he was fantastic, and I would love to see him again. I don't think it'll ever happen. I've met Julian, his half brother. I like Julian enormously. The whole thing has been very strange.
So along came Mr. Geffen, and you made the decision to record the album Double Fantasy.
Actually, we recorded the album before we talked to Geffen.
Right, exactly.
Broadcaster Malcolm Gary.
He was the only one who offered them a record deal without saying, I want to hear the album first. Now, that was pretty brave, thinking back to some of the stuff they'd done in Two Virgins, etc., which was way, way, way out there, very, very avant-garde. It could have been another one of them.
I think after all these years, the Double Fantasy holds up.
Guitarist Earl Slick.
It holds up really well. People make a mistake at times where they haven't made a record for a while, and the first thing they do is they go, well, what's happening now? Didn't do that. He just wrote songs that he would write. And I think that's why it holds up.
The death of John had affected everybody so much. You wanted to cling on to whatever you could was actually out there. And that album was the most recent thing.
When we started this record, he was just in the best spirits he's ever been. He was a very happy man.
Record producer Jack Douglas.
He was fulfilled by his family. And Yoko was wonderful for him. Had taken care of his life.
So this was the whole package.
DJ Paul Gambacini.
And you couldn't just divide it up by taking the singles out. The singles were hits, but they were all part of a greater conceptual work.
Let's talk about the single, Just Like Starting Over. Was that an obvious choice to the both of you as a single? Were you happy with that?
I think some of the other tracks are stronger, like Losing You. Might be a stronger piece of material. But Starting Over was the best way to start over.
How easy was it to get musicians together?
Easy. They were panting at the doors, man. They all couldn't wait to get in.
And we were very lucky.
The only guy I knew was Hugh McCracken, who'd worked on Christmas Song, the one you mentioned, and maybe a couple more tracks.
And you got Andy Newmark on drums.
Yeah, who toured with George. And Tony Levine, the bass player, fantastic. I didn't even know he existed. He's famous, but I didn't know he'd worked with all sorts of people. Earl Slick was Bowie's when Bowie was in his R&B incarnation at that period, mid-70s. Earl Slick had been his guitarist.
I was 12-ish maybe, and I hadn't really been into music per se as a fan of anybody's until I saw the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show. I was a Beatle fan for the same reason that every other 12 to 14-year-old boy was at the time. Cool-looking dudes with cool haircuts and clothes and screaming girls. That, in all honesty, then I started listening to the records.
I thought that it was far from his best work. I thought it contained 3 or 4 songs, Beautiful Boy, Watching the Wheels, a couple of others, which were good, with a medium-sized G by Lennon standards. But hey, what a question. Why was it so popular? Well, it grieves me to have to say it, but the answer, I'm afraid, is obvious.
The record won the Grammy Award for Album of the Year. Many cynics might say it wouldn't have had he lived, but the point is he didn't live, and people went back and listened again. They realized that a lot of it was autobiographical and that the two of them were inseparable, and when they listened again, they found deeper profundity.
On the one hand, it would have been an album that people wanted to buy because they loved John Lennon and they wanted to buy as a tribute to him. There were quite a number of reasons. But for me, compared with some of his other work, It wasn't a great album, but it has been understandably lauded because of what it became. It was as much part of his obituary as anything else.
So the album becomes this multi-million-dollar success story, but for the most tragic reasons, as well as incredibly good songs.
I mean, part of me would sooner have been a comedian, you know. I just don't have the guts to stand up and do it.
I'd just like to say the same as the others. Thanks for the Purple Hearts. Silver! Oh, yeah. Sorry about that, Harold. We'd like to sincerely thank you all, and we've got to go now because the fella on the film wants us, and he says it's costing him a fortune. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
I love Faulty Towers. I'd like to be in that, you know.
Would you? You know, you can imagine John homesick in New York. You know, he sees this show called Faulty Towers with John Cleese, who personifies the kind of worst kind of Englishman, you know, which we've all run into, and John will have run into, and grown up with that sort of Englishman, especially in the 50s.
Faulty Towers is the greatest show I've seen in years. They have it over here now. God, it's great.
You know, on the one hand, he told me how much he loved Monty Python, how much he loved so much of the work of people from that era, because he'd grown up with the Goons.
And I grew up with the Goon Show as a kid, listening to the radio and, you know, Moriarty and Eccles and Blue Bottle. And, you know, he talks about the Goon Show. And it was, I mean, for its time, Spike Milligan, I mean, just way ahead of its time.
In a review for the New York Times, Lennon said, "I could go on all day about the Goons and their influence on a generation. Their humour was proof that the world was insane. What it means to the Americans, I can't imagine."
As you all know, Harris Wilsard won the general election with a very small margery over the Torchies, thus putting the labouring party back into Powell after a large abscess. This he could not have done without span the barking of the trade unions, headed by Frank Cunnings, who now has a safe seat in Nuneaton, thank you, and Frank, only 62, Bowles, who hasn't. Sir Alec Doubtless Whom was, quote, bitterly disappointed, but managed to keep smirking on his 500,000-acre estate in Scotland with a bit of fishing and that. Thank you.
You know, after all these years, it's like going to be 40 years since John left the planet. I didn't realize until he'd been gone for quite a while just how unique of a man and an artist that he was. And he managed to do things and to make people think and to change things. And there isn't a person like that now.
When you listen to John in that interview talk about how free he felt he was and safe he was living in New York, it's probably the most poignant part of the whole interview. It certainly was for me. And it's kind of almost creepy, bearing in mind what was about to happen, you know, hours later.
One final question to you. What about your private life and your own sense of security these days? David Bowie, I think, has recently said, but the great thing about New York is that he can walk down the street and people, instead of rushing up and ripping his clothes off, will come up, or rather just walk past him and say, "Hi, David, how are you?" And he can say, "I'm very well." Is it the same for John and Yoko?
Yeah, that's what made me finally stay here. It wasn't a conscious decision. I just found that I was going to movies, going to restaurants, and I can go right out this door now and go in a restaurant. Do you want to know how great that is? Or go to the movies? I mean, people will come up and ask for autograph or say hi, but they won't bug you, you know?
If only Kennedy had had a hardtop car. If only Martin Luther King hadn't gone onto the balcony. If only John, you know, hadn't come back when he did. Yeah.
He was one of the very few outspoken musicians that didn't come off like a loony or a conspiracy theorist, that spoke his mind. And we needed somebody like that then, and we need people like that now.
You ever go to New York and you go to the strawberry fields, I guess you call it a memorial to John in Central Park, with, you know, the word Imagine in the middle, and the backdrop of that is the Dakota building where John and Yoko lived for all those years. And there's a pilgrimage there every day, every nationality, every age, every colour of skin, every gender.
There have been a lot of theories expounded, haven't there, about what happened. I believe he may well have been cremated. I don't know where she put the ashes, but one could guess that the tribute and lovely memorial to him in Central Park might have had a connection. I honestly don't know. I'm speculating. I went there with her and Sean, and it was incredibly moving. It was a very, very strange experience, but I was touched that she wanted to show me personally what they'd done. And it's still there. And I have family friends heading to New York. And I gave them a list of things to do in New York. And very near the top of that list was go to Central Park to the Lennon Memorial.
Beatle biographer Hunter Davies.
He was the leader of the best pop group the planet Earth has ever had.
Record producer Sir George Martin.
Together with McCartney, who certainly was his equal, and is his equal. He's one of the great songwriters of our time and of the century.
That last album shows a man who's happy at home. He loves his wife, he loves his son, he loves his life. Well, may we all be so resolved when we go out.
The interview with Andy Peebles completely changed my view of where John felt he was at as a man and as an artist and as a husband and as a father.
When we made Double Fantasy after his 5 years off, he finally felt that he wasn't a Beatle anymore.
When John was singing a song right there in front of you, I feel everything. I see John sitting there, and I don't even know what key I'm in or what. I just play, and it goes by itself. It's like a dream. It's like meditation. And he gave me those moments, and those I'm going to take with me.
I think we need a John Lennon now. We're missing that kind of voice. You know, I mean, activist is the wrong word, but we need that kind of outspoken force of nature, which is what he was. Somebody who is not afraid at whatever cost it is to him or to his loved ones to just go out there and say it how it is. And, you know, God rest his soul, thank God he did it.
I mean, he's left behind a canon of great music. You know, let's say it. John and Paul changed the music business. They were the people who realised that you didn't need to go down Denmark Street, Tin Pan Alley as we all affectionately called it, to find a music publisher to give you a song. Those days were gone. You wrote your own songs if you were John and Paul. You could argue over what percentage of each song the two individuals were responsible for, but they changed the face of it. We were part of a glorious period which brought endless joy to millions of people. And when I hear their music and I hear their voices, for me it still does.
Well, as I sit here talking to you, you look two very happy people.
And yes.
John and Yoko, on behalf of us, thank you very, very much.
A pleasure. A great pleasure to talk to you and all the English and Scots and Welsh and Irish listening. And hello, Mimi. Hello, Julian. How are you doing? Yeah, Julian, my son, kindly informed me through Yoko, well, you know, most of my friends are buying it for Kiss, Kiss, Kiss. Well, I don't mind as long as you buy it, kids. If you don't like Paul, you can always buy George. Remember that once? And now you got a choice between John and Yoko.
Cheers.
The producers would like to pay tribute to Andy Peebles, who passed away on 22nd March 2025. The interview Andy did with John Lennon lasted 3 hours and 15 minutes. The interview we did with Andy lasted 3 hours and 20 minutes. This was his final interview. Lennon's Last Weekend was narrated by Neil McCormick, produced by Scott Mullaney, written, directed and edited by Brian Grant.